I was a teacher fired for poor performance, but as Principal Margaret Kellerman's thin lips curved into that practiced smile while she slid the termination letter across her mahogany desk, I noticed something that would change everything. The corner of a bank statement peeking out from beneath her leather portfolio, stamped with numbers that made my blood run cold. The irony wasn't lost on me. 23 years of dedication to Lincoln Elementary, countless late nights grading papers, weekends spent creating lesson plans that actually engaged my fourth graders, and here I sat, watching this woman destroy my career with the same casual indifference she showed when denying requests for classroom supplies. Her manicured fingers drummed against the desk as she waited for me to sign the acknowledgement form, each tap echoing like a countdown to my professional execution. My eyes drifted back to that bank statement. The visible portion showed a deposit of $47,000 dated just 3 days ago. Kellerman taught for exactly 2 years before climbing the administrative ladder, and her principal salary was public record, $78,000 annually. The math didn't add up, but the pieces of a larger puzzle began clicking into place in my mind. She shifted slightly, inadvertently revealing more of the statement. Another deposit, this one for $32,000, dated 2 weeks prior. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral, even managed what I hoped looked like defeated resignation as I reached for the pen she offered. The termination letter cited budget cuts and performance concerns, vague language that would protect the district from wrongful termination lawsuits, but I knew the real reason I was being eliminated. Last month's faculty meeting, when I'd questioned the mysterious disappearance of funds allocated for the new computer lab, the way Kellerman's face had darkened when I'd suggested we needed better transparency and budget reporting, how she'd dismissed my concerns with that same condescending smile she wore now. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, giving myself time to memorize every detail of what I could see on that bank statement. The account number, partially visible. The bank's logo. Most importantly, the pattern of large, irregular deposits that had no business appearing in a public school principal's personal banking records. Kellerman's relief was palpable as she collected the signed documents. She probably thought she'd neutralized a potential threat, removed the one teacher bold enough to ask uncomfortable questions about money. She had no idea she'd just handed me the ammunition for my own investigation. Walking out of Lincoln Elementary for what I assumed would be the last time, I felt the familiar weight of defeat settle on my shoulders. But underneath that defeat, something else stirred, a cold, calculating fury that would sustain me through what came next. 23 years of my life had been dismissed in a 10-minute meeting, but Margaret Kellerman had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated exactly how thorough a veteran teacher could be when conducting research. The next morning, I began my real education. I started with public records, diving into the labyrinthine world of school district financial reporting. Coffee shops became my office, laptop open for hours as I traced the flow of money through Lincoln Elementary's budgets. The discrepancies weren't immediately obvious. Kellerman was smarter than I'd initially given her credit for, but they were there, hidden in the details like grammatical errors in a hastily written essay, federal grants that showed as received but never allocated, supply orders that cost twice what they should have, with the excess seemingly vanishing into administrative overhead. Most intriguing of all, a consulting contract with an educational technology firm called Pinnacle Learning Solutions for $180,000 in services that, according to teachers I still had contact with, had never been delivered. I spent 3 weeks mapping the financial inconsistencies, creating spreadsheets that would have impressed my most meticulous students. The pattern emerged slowly but undeniably. Money was being systematically diverted from legitimate educational expenses into accounts that shouldn't exist. Pinnacle Learning Solutions became my primary focus. The company had been incorporated just 18 months ago, right around the time Kellerman started pushing for more innovative educational partnerships. The registered address led me to a strip mall in the industrial district, where I found nothing but a vacant office space with a "for lease" sign that looked like it had been there for years. But the most interesting discovery came when I cross-referenced the incorporation documents with property records. Pinnacle Learning Solutions had been registered by someone named M.K. Associates. Margaret Kellerman's initials weren't exactly subtle, but they weren't definitive proof either. I needed something more concrete, something that would connect the dots in a way that even the most skeptical investigator couldn't ignore. That's when I remembered Janet Holbrook. Janet had worked in the district's accounting department for 15 years before retiring last spring. We'd served on several committees together, and she'd always struck me as someone who noticed when numbers didn't add up. More importantly, she'd mentioned feeling uncomfortable about some of the recent financial changes in the district, though she'd never elaborated. I found her at the community garden where she volunteered 3 mornings a week, tending tomato plants with the same careful attention she'd once applied to budget reconciliations. Her face lit up when she saw me, then darkened when I explained why I'd been fired. Janet's reaction when I showed her my research was everything I'd hoped for. Her eyes widened as she recognized the patterns I'd uncovered, and I could see her mental wheels turning as she processed the implications. She excused herself for a moment, returning with a small notebook she'd kept during her final months at the district. The notebook contained Janet's private observations about financial irregularities she'd noticed but felt powerless to address. Purchase orders that bypassed normal approval processes, invoices that seemed inflated but were fast-tracked through payment. Most damning of all, handwritten notes about pressure she'd felt from Kellerman to process certain payments without her usual scrutiny. Janet's evidence filled in crucial gaps in my investigation, but I still needed the smoking gun, something that would definitively prove Kellerman's involvement in the embezzlement scheme. The answer came from an unexpected source: my own methodical teaching habits. For years, I'd kept detailed attendance records, not just for students but for faculty meetings, professional development sessions, and school events. Reviewing those records now, I noticed something significant. On 3 separate occasions when large payments to Pinnacle Learning Solutions had been processed, Kellerman had been absent from school, citing personal days. Each absence coincided exactly with major financial transactions that should have required her direct oversight. The pattern suggested she was deliberately avoiding being present during the processing of fraudulent payments, creating plausible deniability while still orchestrating the entire scheme. But proving that connection would require access to more detailed financial records than I could obtain through public channels. That's when I decided to go back to school, not as a student but as a substitute teacher. The district maintained a pool of qualified substitutes for emergency coverage, and my credentials were impeccable despite the termination. Getting on the list required only a few phone calls and a willingness to work on short notice for minimal pay. My first assignment came 2 weeks later, a 3-day stint covering for a teacher at Harrison Middle School while they attended a conference. It gave me legitimate access to the district's internal systems, including the financial database that Janet had shown me how to navigate during her accounting tenure. During lunch breaks and planning periods, I systematically accessed records that painted a complete picture of Kellerman's embezzlement operation. The scheme was more sophisticated than I'd initially realized, involving not just Pinnacle Learning Solutions, but a network of shell companies all designed to siphon money from various educational programs. Over the course of 18 months, nearly $400,000 had been diverted from Lincoln Elementary alone. Multiply that across the 3 schools in Kellerman's administrative purview, and the total theft exceeded $1 million. Money that should have gone to classroom supplies, technology upgrades, and educational programs had instead been systematically stolen by the woman entrusted to safeguard our students' resources. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to be strategic about how I revealed it. A simple anonymous tip to the school board might result in a quiet resignation and sealed settlement that would allow Kellerman to escape real consequences. I wanted something more definitive, a revelation that would ensure she faced criminal charges and public humiliation equivalent to what she'd put me through. The opportunity presented itself during the annual budget presentation to the school board, a public meeting where Kellerman would be required to defend her financial stewardship in front of parents, teachers, and community members. The meeting was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday of November, giving me exactly 6 weeks to prepare my evidence in a format that would maximum impact. I spent those weeks crafting a presentation that would systematically dismantle Kellerman's credibility while building an irrefutable case for criminal prosecution. Every document was verified, every financial discrepancy cross-referenced, every shell company traced back to its source. I created visual aids that would make the complex financial crimes accessible to a general audience, knowing that public outrage would be crucial to ensuring justice. But the presentation was only one part of my strategy. I also compiled comprehensive evidence packages for the District Attorney's Office, the State Education Department, and the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Each package was customized for its intended audience, emphasizing the specific legal violations and regulatory breaches relevant to each agency's jurisdiction. The final piece of my preparation involved ensuring maximum public exposure. I reached out to investigative reporters at 3 local news outlets, offering them exclusive access to the evidence in exchange for comprehensive coverage of the story. I also prepared detailed summaries for parent organizations and teacher unions, knowing they would amplify the scandal through their own communication channels. As November approached, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a well-executed lesson plan. Every element was in place, every contingency accounted for. Kellerman had no idea what was coming, but she would soon discover that firing an experienced teacher for asking inconvenient questions had been the biggest mistake of her career. The school board meeting was held in the high school auditorium, a venue chosen to accommodate the unusually large crowd expected for the budget presentation. I arrived early, positioning myself in the 3rd row where I would have a clear view of Kellerman's face when my questions began. The meeting followed its predictable pattern for the first hour. Routine business, committee reports, the superintendent's remarks about standardized test scores. Kellerman's presentation was scheduled as the final agenda item, a strategic placement that would normally ensure minimal public attention as parents and community members drifted away. But tonight was different. Word had somehow spread that the budget presentation might be more interesting than usual, and the auditorium remained surprisingly full as Kellerman took the podium. She looked confident, even smug, as she launched into her prepared remarks about fiscal responsibility and educational innovation. Her presentation highlighted Lincoln Elementary's improved test scores and enhanced technology integration, achievements she attributed to strategic budget allocations and innovative partnerships. She specifically praised the district's relationship with educational consultants who had provided valuable services at competitive rates. That was my cue. I stood during the public comment period, having signed up to speak under my full name and professional credentials. The recognition rippled through the audience as people realized they were looking at the teacher who'd been fired for poor performance just 4 months earlier. My presentation began innocuously enough, with appreciation for the board's commitment to transparency and fiscal accountability. I expressed concern about recent budget allocations and requested clarification on several line items that seemed inconsistent with educational priorities. Kellerman's confident expression began to falter as I asked specific questions about Pinnacle Learning Solutions and the services they'd allegedly provided. Her responses became increasingly evasive as I pressed for details about deliverables, timelines, and outcome measurements. Then I revealed my evidence. The projector screen filled with bank records showing the patterns of deposits into Kellerman's personal accounts, each transaction perfectly timed to coincide with payments to fictitious consulting firms. The auditorium erupted as parents and teachers saw the visual proof of systematic theft from their children's education. Kellerman tried to maintain composure, claiming the documents were fabricated or taken out of context, but her protests became increasingly desperate as I methodically demolished each explanation with additional evidence. Property records showing the vacant addresses of her shell companies, incorporation documents bearing her signature, email communications discussing payment schedules and fund transfers. The coup de grace came when I revealed Janet Holbrook's notebook, reading aloud her contemporaneous observations about pressure to process irregular payments without proper oversight. The credibility of a 15-year accounting veteran was unassailable, and her meticulous documentation provided the final piece of evidence needed to prove criminal intent. Board members huddled in emergency consultation as the audience demanded immediate action. Parents who had struggled to provide basic school supplies for their children learned that hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for education had been stolen by the person they'd trusted to protect their interests. Kellerman's attempt to leave the meeting was blocked by police officers who had been quietly summoned during my presentation. The handcuffs clicking around her wrists provided a satisfying counterpoint to the shocked silence that had replaced her earlier confidence. Local news crews, alerted by my earlier outreach, captured every moment of her arrest. The image of Lincoln Elementary's principal being led away in handcuffs would dominate headlines for weeks, accompanied by detailed exposés of the embezzlement scheme that had robbed students of resources while enriching their supposed advocate. The aftermath unfolded with the relentless momentum I'd carefully orchestrated. Federal investigators seized Kellerman's financial records and traced the full scope of her criminal enterprise. State education officials launched a comprehensive audit of district finances, uncovering additional irregularities that implicated several of Kellerman's administrative allies. Criminal charges followed within days: embezzlement, fraud, money laundering, and breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence I'd assembled formed the backbone of the prosecution's case, leading to a plea agreement that included full restitution, 5 years in federal prison, and permanent disbarment from educational employment. The school board voted unanimously to offer me immediate reinstatement with full back pay and a formal apology for the wrongful termination. But I declined their offer, having realized that my true calling wasn't in the classroom, it was in investigation and accountability. I used the settlement from my wrongful termination lawsuit to establish a nonprofit organization dedicated to exposing financial crimes in educational institutions. My experience with Kellerman had revealed how easily corrupt administrators could exploit the trust placed in them, and I was determined to ensure other dedicated educators wouldn't suffer the same fate I had. 6 months after that pivotal school board meeting, I stood in the renovated computer lab at Lincoln Elementary, watching my former colleagues guide students through programming exercises on equipment purchased with recovered embezzlement funds. The irony was perfect. Kellerman's theft had ultimately resulted in better resources for the students she'd claimed to serve. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet Holbrook, now serving as interim accounting supervisor, while the district rebuilt its financial oversight systems. Another suspicious pattern had emerged at Roosevelt High School, and she wondered if I might be interested in taking a look. I smiled, already reaching for my laptop. Margaret Kellerman had taught me that corruption thrived in the shadows of educational bureaucracy, but she'd also shown me that methodical investigation and strategic revelation could bring even the most arrogant criminals into the light. The hunt was just beginning.